Well, I just wanted to say that we've appreciated the discussions we've heard so far. Both the broad view, looking at the relevance of religion to peace and human rights and stability, as well as the more detailed discussions of individual countries, the local knowledge, the level of detail that that brings to the table, and the discussion with members of the judiciary, from representatives of religious organizations, have all added important parts to this contribution of this discussion we've been having together. This session, we're hoping to look more clearly at some of the very difficult issues that have popped up as we've been discussing, looking specifically at religion and social tensions. Certainly in the 21st century, for many people, religion has become intertwined and associated with images of violence and conflict. Our participants today will look at questions related to this, such as what causes social conflict that's often associated with religion? Is it inevitable if you have a culture with multiple religions? To what extent is religious conflict or conflict associated with religion driven primarily by religious belief, or by other factors or sociological issues, by government policies, by the media? What can be done to prevent religious conflict? We have a distinguished panel. I'm not going to take more of their time. I would invite you to read the bios in the back of the program. Our first speaker will be Professor Rosalind Hackett, who's professor and head of the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Tennessee. Oh, excuse me. Sorry to cause a heart attack there. We switched order. I apologize. Our first speaker will not be Professor Hackett, although we'll be delighted to hear from her second. Our first speaker will be Recep Sentürk, who is a professor of sociology at the Alliance of Civilizations Institute at Fatih SultanMehmet Vakif University in Turkey. And finally, Mark Juergensma is not available to be with us, but Professor Durham will speak third, who, of course, comes from our very own center, where he is director of the Center for Law and Religion Studies, and also is the Susa Young Gates University Professor of Law. So we'll proceed in that order. We'll save some time at the end for questions, and we look forward to a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. This is Blue Mosque from Istanbul, and my presentation is titled as Diversity Management at the Age of Open Civilization, a Call to Multiplexity. This is a beautiful calligraphy also from one of the mosques in Istanbul. And I will address 5 questions and try to answer them briefly. First, I will ask, why do conflicts occur? Is it possible to prevent conflicts before occurring, and how? What's the difference between diversity management and conflict resolution? Why do we need an effective diversity management system today more than ever? How can we learn from the Islamic and Ottoman heritage of diversity management? In my opinion, the most pressing problem of our time is diversity management, because there are many conflicts occurring around the world as a result of the bad diversity management or lack of diversity management. And when I mean by diversity management is governing diversity of ideas, beliefs, interests, innate and inherited qualities by accommodating them. And I also argue that we live in an era which I like to call open civilization. By this I mean that at the local level, we have multi-civilizational society in which members of different civilizations get together to make up a society. So this group here is a multi-civilizational society. It's an example of open civilization. And today, we no longer have homogeneous societies as we used to have in the past. So this makes it important for us to recognize that we have a new social structure of diversity. And at the global level, all civilizations are interconnected to each other, but not only the ones which neighbor each other. But in the past, only the civilizations which neighbored each other, they had connections with each other. But today, they are all connected to each other, and they influence and get influenced from other civilizations. So I say that civilizations today, they have no walls, no doors, no windows. And so my most important question about why do conflicts occur? My argument for this is that conflicts occur for one of the two reasons. First, the ideological or religious illusion that it's possible to eliminate diversity and make all people the same. So this is the most important cause of conflicts. And the second one, even when diversity is accepted, then it should be managed effectively. If it's not managed effectively, then conflicts occur. And by arguing this, I am refusing the argument that conflicts come from diversity, and diversity is a threat to social unity and stability. So I am refusing this argument. Is it possible to eliminate social diversity? There are two answers to this question. One, say yes, and these are authoritarian extremists. They think that diversity is a threat to social unity and national identity, so it should be eliminated. And those who say no, they are people who believe in pluralism, that diversity leads to prosperity and power instead of conflict and division. And also history shows us that humanity had always had diversity. There has never been a single civilization dominating the whole world. Humanity always had multiple civilizations, multiple religions, multiple races, ethnic groups. And also religion, in particular Islam, says that diversity is God's will and creation. Let me cite one verse from the Quran supporting this view. The Quran says, to each of you, we prescribe a law and a method. Had Allah willed, He would have made you one nation, united in religion, but He intended to test you in what He has given you. So raise to all that's good. To Allah is your return altogether, and He will then inform you concerning that over which you used to differ. So this verse shows that diversity, it's God's will, and it's not possible to eliminate it. So this is a calligraphy showing interconnectedness of the universe. And how to prevent conflicts before occurring. So my argument is that if we can manage diversity, which is the cause of conflicts, then we can prevent conflicts before occurring. And there are two approaches today to conflicts. One is the conflict resolution studies. It's an academic discipline. And diversity management, I am trying to make it a new discipline regarding conflict prevention. So conflict resolution is a passive approach to conflicts. It waits until the conflict occurs, then intervenes to solve the problem. And it's backward-looking, and it's remedial, trying to heal the problem after it takes place. And as an alternative to this, my approach, which I call diversity management, it's proactive, so intervenes before the conflict occurs, and forward-looking, preventive. Why is an effective diversity management system more important than ever today? Because, as I mentioned, diversity is an essential feature of human societies throughout all centuries. But today, it is more important for us to have an effective diversity management system because today, diversity is increasing, civilizations are getting intertwined, And as a result of this, a new condition for humanity emerged, which I call open civilization. Globally, the structure of the network of relations among civilizations has changed because they all got interconnected with each other in a very close manner. Second, locally, we have today all societies as multi-civilizational societies. So because of this, both at the global and local level, we need a very effective diversity management system. Otherwise, this poses a source of major conflicts at the global and local level. And today, we observe many examples and outcomes of this. And how to manage diversity today, my argument is that a multiplex worldview is the best way of managing diversity. Today, we have two views on diversity. One I call briefly multiplicity, that society is characterized by multiplicity. This is a postmodern approach. It emphasizes horizontalness of social relations and it generalizes relativism as a way to prevent conflict. And the other approach which I advocate, I briefly name it multiplexity. It is traditional. It includes both vertical and horizontal relations, and it gives space to relativism, but without generalizing it. So there are things that are relative, but there is also absolute truth, and they have their places. And thus it includes multiplicity at each level. And this multiplex view, I derive it from Islamic heritage. In traditional Islam, the existence, the knowledge, the methodology, and the meaning, and the truth has been accepted to have multiple levels, which I call multiplex ontology, that existence had visible world, invisible world, and the divine world. So there are three major levels of existence. At each level should be analyzed in a different way, using a corresponding epistemology for each level of existence. So reason, sense perception, and reported knowledge are accepted to be the sources of knowledge. Having these different views incorporated together in one inclusive worldview allows accommodating both rationalist and empiricist, both materialist and idealist in the same paradigm. And corresponding to this multiplex ontology and epistemology, there is a multiplex methodology incorporating rational, empirical, and mystic methods. And the same thing at in the field of hermeneutics. There are different levels of meaning: external meaning, internal meaning, and the meaning of meaning. So let me explain what's meant by meaning of meaning a little bit. Let's say you knock the door and someone from inside says there is no one inside. What's the meaning of this? So if you look at the meaning, you don't understand. You have to look at the meaning of the meaning, which means I don't want you to come in. So that's the meaning of meaning. So this theory was developed by Abdul Kahir Jurjani, 10th century scholar of rhetorics. And also, the truth is multiplex. There isn't a single truth. There are many levels of truth. Truth varies at each level of existence and knowledge. So this approach allows accommodating different views regarding ontology, epistemology, methodology, meaning, and truth. And also at the level of normative system, law and morality, the traditional Islamic view had a multiplex normative system. The primary and the general level is the law, which is based on reciprocity and retaliation. And then another level, which is called tariqa, it is known as Sufism, is based on forgiving, not reciprocity. forgiving and sharing and sacrificing. And a higher level of morality and normativity is called hakika. It is based not on reciprocity, not on forgiving, but doing good to those who do evil to you. So it's a multiplex normativity. And this multiplex normative system uses a multi-valued normative logic. Usually in the legal and ethical thinking, dual logic is used, which is based on right and wrong. But the Islamic normative thinking is not based on dual logic. It's not based on simply right and wrong. So there is absolute wrong, and there is absolute right, and there are things in between. Right to a certain extent, wrong to a certain extent. Not every right and wrong is the same. Like killing somebody is not the same as lying or insulting. So there are different levels of right and wrong. So it is based on a multi-valued logic here. And also the purpose of law is defined at 3 levels. That law should aim providing necessities for life. This is universal human rights, and they should be provided for everyone. And at another level, law should provide legal rights for each group based on their needs. And also, at another level, there are moral rights which are not enforced legally, but enforced religiously. And as a consequence of this conceptual, philosophical, legal, and moral system, it was possible for the Muslims to accommodate different schools of philosophy, different schools of theology, different schools of law, and different mystic schools in their own society. And the same way, they could also accommodate non-Muslim communities, which is called millet system, and millah means a religious community. It is well known that Muslims accommodate Christians and Jews in their system, but less known that they also include non-Ahli Kitab, non-Christian, non-Jewish people also. And a good example of this, the Muslim rule in India, where Muslims incorporated Hindus and Buddhists in their system and granted them the same rights they granted to Christians and Jews in the Middle East, Indonesia, and in the Ottoman Empire, which shows the universality of Islamic law. But in 19th century, what happened is that Muslims, because of the westernization and modernization and colonizations, abandoned this Islamic diversity management system and adopted nation-state system, which brought about conflicts, religious conflicts, ethnic conflicts in the Middle East and in the Balkan region. And in my conclusion, I would like to say that today, the most important problem we have is the diversity management problem all over the world, in America, in Europe, in Middle East, in Balkans, everywhere. And the best way of managing diversity and preventing conflicts before occurring is through a multiplex worldview, a multiplex normative system. And if we need a practical example of this, we may learn from the Islamic and Ottoman experience. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My contribution to this panel centers on the role of modern media in understanding the relationship between religion and social tensions. The significance of the agency and effects of media are often underestimated or underanalyzed in this regard, since they are perceived as just neutral forms of communication or trivial forms of entertainment. Nothing could be further from reality, most especially in our global media-rich environment, where technological advances, most notably in social media, have revolutionized opportunities for community and network creation, activism, self-determination, as well as for hate speech and new forms of control by state organs and corporate culture. The legal and rights dimensions of such developments hardly need emphasizing. While I have long been interested in how religious actors and institutions have appropriated new media technologies, the bulk of my research has been in the African context. However, I believe that what I am arguing in this paper relates to many other regional contexts too. Africa constitutes a particularly rich laboratory to study these questions, since the growth of the media industry has occurred relatively recently, since the early 1990s, and relatively rapidly in most countries. So one can assess the effects of deregulation of diverse media, whether print, broadcast, or electronic media, large or small, in a range of locations. Africa is known as the radio continent, but more recently associated with phenomenal growth in mobile telephony. There is virtually no religious organization or community in Africa today, whether traditional Christian or Muslim, or some other form of religious movement, that has not embraced these new modes of communication, information, expression, and representation one way or another, depending on financial means. This is especially the case in this new phase of media liberalization that has occurred in conjunction with or as a consequence of the democratization processes underway in many African states. The dismantling of state monopolies of the broadcast and print media and the commercializing of airtime and ownership have radically altered the media landscape, with significant consequences for religious communication and practice. This new dispensation has also generated new forms of competitiveness among religious organizations for public attention, resources, and legal status. If you don't mind the self-promotion, I just wanted to share with you my recent co-edited book on this topic, if anyone is interested. Yet, there is still a lack of attention paid to the impact of religion and media taken together for conflict and peace-building issues. This became particularly apparent to me when I was living in Nigeria. Media misuse or abuse were often the catalysts for religiously related conflicts. I will provide some examples of this shortly. So while a fellow at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame just over a decade ago, I set about studying how Africa's new media revolution might be replicating, if not intensifying, old, as well as generating new forms of religious intolerance and conflict. This went against the grain for some people who associated media liberalization with democracy, development, and freedom of expression. I was not, and I'm not disputing that, but rather arguing that unfettered or unself-censored, mass-mediated religious expression in regions with weak or non-existent broadcasting commissions and uneven standards of media professionalism, let alone pre-existing religious tensions, could have very negative outcomes. I identified 4 flashpoint areas that you see up here: inequity, encroachment, defamation, and commercialization. I'm going to talk briefly about each 4 of these flashpoints. Inequity. It's primarily in the area of ownership, as well as production and transmission, that one encounters complaints about inequity. Muslims in particular have been very vocal, along with traditional religious practitioners such as Nokuzola Mndende in South Africa, in accusing the media in Africa of being in the hands of Western, Christian, or Zionist gatekeepers. One cannot assume that, with liberalization, state control of the airwaves has lessened. There is still enormous power in granting licenses, capacity, and frequencies. Governments can pull the strings of the media commissions and other regulatory bodies in order to reward political allies and fend off enemies. For example, after Jerry John Rawlings took power for the 2nd time in Ghana in 1981, only a neo-traditional religious group, the Africania Mission, was granted airtime on state radio. In Kenya, former President Daniel Arap Moi was much criticized for giving preferential access to conservative churches, as they did not contest his authority, unlike other mainstream religious organizations. Even where governments held back on issuing licenses to religious stations, they might still favor particular religious groups by turning a blind eye to bias in program content, as in Ghana, where private FM stations stacked their primetime programming in favor of their predominantly Pentecostal Christian audiences, with gospel music, Christian perspectives on social issues, and pastors as presenters. In contrast, some churches in northern Nigeria have limited, say at Easter and Christmas, or no access to airtime, whether public or commercial. Media commissions can also be part of the problem. In 2004, the Nigerian National Broadcasting Commission imposed a controversial ban on miracles. Well, that's to say, trying to perform miracles on TV. The edict stated that Nigerian broadcasters were no longer allowed to show miracles on television in a way that was not provable and believable. Television stations that failed to abide by the ruling would be fined, and their equipment could be confiscated. News of this ban spread far and wide, but the NBC was not forthcoming when asked what would constitute verification of a miracle. Reactions to this ban were mixed. Some welcomed the cutback in faith-healing programming and miracle marketing. Others protested the ban and claimed their religious rights. Christ Embassy, one of Nigeria's largest Pentecostal churches, whose mainstay is a highly popular television program that you see here, Atmosphere for Miracles, went to court to challenge the ban. Others, such as T.B. Joshua's Synagogue Church for All Nations, also renowned for its miracle healing activities, ignored the restriction. Rumors even circulated that the ban was part of a Muslim conspiracy to prevent Christians from stealing their members. Lagos-based Media Rights Agenda expressed concern about the ban, stating, quote, "We believe that the NBC Director General should not, with executive fiat, ban them. Miracles and belief are essential characteristics of Christianity, and banning miracles in religious broadcasts will therefore tamper with the totality of the Christian faith as presented in such broadcasts," end quote. They further added that, quote, "Religion is a very sensitive matter in Nigeria, and any decision affecting the broadcast of any aspect of it must be taken with caution so that it does not create room for further crisis in a nation already overwhelmed by a state of insecurity," end quote. Those were prophetic words. I understand from my Lagos-based Nigerians here that the ban on miracles is still in effect, in that miracle healing programming is not viewable on terrestrial TV, only on satellite, cable, or the internet. Then on to encroachment and displacement. In the past, boundary maintenance was more feasible between religious communities. Now non-Christians fear not just the, oops, I've lost one somewhere. Sorry. That's it, sorry. Fear not just the penetrating preaching of high-tech Pentecostal and evangelical crusades, such as that of the popular German preacher Reinhard Bonnke and his Christ for All Nations campaign, but also the aggressive marketing techniques, they tend to use photographs a lot, to which they are increasingly exposed. Islamic-led governments may ban Christian radio stations in their territories, but they can rarely stop the messages being broadcast from just over the border in neighboring countries and now by satellite from other parts of the world. Moreover, the messages may connote a takeover or transformation of a shared space, such as "Welcome to Jesus Campus" or "God's all-consuming fire is sweeping Nigeria." These discourses of displacement are rendered even more threatening to Muslim and traditional religious leaders by their amplification through modern media technologies. Flooding the print and broadcast media with announcements of impending crusades in a range of local and national languages may be an effective marketing technique, but such a media blitz is also an effective tool of alienation, if not provocation. It led to deadly riots in northern Nigeria in 1991, for instance. Ghanaian scholar of media and religion, Kwabena Asamoah Gyiadu, tellingly situates this in a wider context. Quote, "The main agenda of Pentecostal charismatic churches, therefore, is to bring their influence to bear on all aspects of national life, including discouraging any recognition of other faiths, and the media have proved a very powerful means of achieving this end," end quote. Commercial airtime, now largely dominated by Pentecostal televangelists, whether local or foreign, and a lucrative source of revenue for financially strapped stations, notably at the state level, has edged out public service religious programming in many regions. We should also not forget the tensions caused by amplified worship and calls to prayer. However, recent research by anthropologist Brian Larkin on the conflict-ridden multi-religious city of Jos in northern Nigeria demonstrates that people tune in and tune out of public, tune in and tune out of public religious sounds according to their own affiliations. Defamation. In seeking to access and influence increasingly competitive religious marketplaces around Africa, many religious actors and groups are adopting new discourses of power and demonization. New media technologies facilitate the transmission and amplification of these messages, in particular the FM and community radio stations that have rapidly multiplied in many African countries over the last few decades. But these cannot be easily monitored or regulated by state broadcasting commissions or watchdog bodies. So, in competitive public spheres where the climate is to advance particular religious agendas, others can be alienated or offended. Just as a lot of the religious hate speech propagated by Christians and Muslims against each other used to be found in pamphlets and tracts that circulated easily in marketplaces or places of work, now it can be heard on the radio or sent via text messages at much lower cost to far more people. The recognition of the potential of social media in fomenting tensions between religious communities was recognized by Muslim and Christian leaders in the aftermath of a violent attack on a Catholic church in Arusha, Tanzania in 2013. This led to an announcement by the police that they would arrest those who spread religious hate speech via loudspeakers in churches and mosques, text messaging from mobile phones, the internet, or social networks. Getting to the end. Finally, commercialization. Despite the role played by radio stations in laying the roots of democratic culture in Africa, the majority of the new radio stations are commercial. This has given rise to fears about the undermining of public interest programming and its capacity to promote civil society values. Furthermore, the consumerist model and the focus on entertainment drives not only the entertainment of mass audiences, but the servicing of religious publics, cultivating enclave-oriented viewing and listening. Conclusion. The focus for my research and for this presentation has been more on the tensions, conflict, violence side of the imbrications of religion and media. While not in the league of the genocidal broadcast of Radio Mille Collines in Rwanda in the 1990s, the trends and examples I have highlighted, whether short-term or long-term, give cause for concern and compel greater scrutiny. Hent de Vries reminds us that the media are more than means of communication. They mediate and construct sensibilities regarding citizenship, for example. But as I have discussed above, they may also incite or facilitate acts of violence and discrimination on religious grounds, which is why there are several references to the heightened role of the media in the UN Commission on Human Rights revised resolution on combating defamation of religions. If I'd had more time, I would have shared with you some media initiatives to promote peace and inclusion. This book, which puts a lot of emphasis on peace, by Jolyon Mitchell, is worth checking out. I would have also highlighted the South African Broadcasting Corporation's religious programming that provides wonderful opportunities for civil religious debate and public education. The conflict management capacity of social media platforms is being explored, especially by the Catholic Church. Many of you may be familiar, find this, I've lost a slide somewhere. Okay. Many of you may be familiar with the award-winning television programs developed by the Nigerian imam and pastor team to promote dialogue and mutual understanding. Finally, let me close by contending that in the context of the current media revolution and global market trends, the challenges of balancing freedom of expression and freedom of religion and belief are surely greater than ever, and that we ignore the paradoxical agency of new religious media in fostering social harmony or disharmony at our peril. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm sorry to be a substitute for Juergensmeyer, but I'll do my best. Freedom of religion or belief is fundamental to the structure of peace building. Without it, no society can be fully just, and processes aimed at achieving stable and lasting peace are necessarily incomplete. This fundamental human right has long been considered a critical tool for ending and averting religious warfare, but it also provides necessary footings needed to crystallize peace out of conflict. Let's see. Sorry, I've got two things here. Sorry, I have to run two computers here. This is a famous passage often quoted in the European Court of Human Rights, talking about pluralism. It says, while it's possible that tension is created in situations where a religious or any other community becomes divided, this is one of the unavoidable consequences of pluralism. The role of the authorities in such circumstances is not to remove the cause of tension by eliminating the pluralism, but to ensure that the competing groups tolerate each other. Now that's the right recipe, but not an easy recipe, and I think one of the reasons we've come together is to try and think more about what's what's necessary in that respect. Here. So, what I want to do in the time left to me is talk about the relationship of religion and violence, the features of freedom of religion or belief that are necessary for securing peace in the context of deep pluralism, and mechanisms enabling FORB to contribute to social peace. Last spring, Heiner Bielefeld, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, gave one of his topical reports on violence in the name of religion. And he spoke of the complexity of this phenomenon. It can take many forms. I'm not going to take the time to read the list of kinds of things that he focused on. There are many different kinds of perpetrators. We do see disproportionate targeting of dissidents, of minorities, and converts. And this can be not only interreligious but intra-religious. It can also have significant gender impacts. One of the things that Heiner counseled against was overly simplistic interpretations of the problem. So on the one hand, there's a tendency to impute all the blame to religion. In civil wars, communal violence, terrorist acts, or other violent conflicts, putting the label of religion on what's going on is often overly simplistic because there are obviously non-religious factors at stake. At the same time, there can be an oversimplification in another direction to say, oh, parties are just instrumentalizing religion. This isn't really religion. Religion is not really at fault. It avoids religious leaders responsible and involved in solutions, and it contributes to inadequate understanding of conflict. So, in a way, we've lived with a standard account that goes something like this. There's a sociological pluralism that's the reality in all our countries in different degrees. We're all minorities somewhere. Globally, we're all minorities. At best, we're strong majorities in particular places, but increasingly the shrinking world witnesses to us that our co-religionists are in minority positions elsewhere. That's certainly been the reality for our religious tradition. Religion involves transcendent values treasured more than life itself. It generates loyalties that run deeper than ties to any earthly sovereign, and because religious differences are deep and non-negotiable, they lead to intractable conflicts. This is the standard account. Religious freedom as a tool is a tool that emerged from the cauldron of post-Reformation religious wars to quell the violence. Now, I want to pick up on 2 or 3 things to help qualify and clarify this picture. I've been much taken by a book by William Kavanaugh called The Myth of Religious Violence. Now, he doesn't really say that it's a total myth. I mean, he's quite realistic to recognize that religion can be a factor. Like romantic love, religion is deeply implicated in much that is highest, but also much that is lowest in the human condition. But the myth that the religion is the real explanation often skews analysis and skews public policy. So here are the elements of the myth as Kavanaugh portrays them. Religion has essential transhistorical and transcultural features distinct from the features of secular society. Part of this essence, and part of the problem is viewing that there is an essence here, part of the essence is rooted in the irrationality of religion is a peculiarly dangerous inclination to promote violence. Religion must thus be tamed by submitting it to and restricting its access to public power. So that's the story. This is part of an Enlightenment narrative. The myth is that part of a broader Enlightenment narrative says that there was an invented dichotomy between the religious and the secular, which constructed religion as an irrational and dangerous impulse that must give way in public to rational secular forms of power. Now, there are a number of ways to sort of take on this myth. It is very pervasive, and I think it shapes the way a lot of people who are not really immersed in these issues, it shapes their approach to policy, to politics, to foreign affairs, and so on. The reality is that religions are no more inclined to violence than secular ideologies and institutions such as nationalism, National Socialism, Marxism, capitalism, and liberalism. Religions are not more absolutist, divisive, or irrational than secular counterparts. There's really no convincing way to separate religious and secular violence. There is a hazard of religious warfare, however. Wars of religion typically are cited as the cauldron that led for the calling forth of the secular state. Indeed, the founding myth of the secular state is that the modern state was born as a peacemaker, resolving religious intransigence of Catholics and Protestants, the beginning of the Westphalian world of modern foreign relations with the rise of the nation state, the early adoption of the cuius regio principle, the notion that prince would determine the religion of his people, and that was a secular approach to trying to solve the problems of international religious warfare. Now, there are problems with this narrative. The religious wars certainly occurred, but the battle lines were often not drawn along religious lines. The much more typical pattern was that conflicts emerged to resist the state-building efforts of centralizing monarchs that were building the nation states. That is, it was the state building itself trying to eliminate resistance from feudal religious sources that was causing the tension, and it was not religion per se. State restrictions on religion flowing from state-building initiatives were often the real cause of the conflict. Now, we have modern versions of the same kind of picture. The work of Brian Grimm and Roger Finke has been referred to in the conference. Their books provides extensive empirical research, and the key finding is that restrictions on religious freedom are highly correlated with and appear to be a significant factor in causing religious violence. That is, the traditional picture was you had rival religious groups, and their tensions led to conflicts which spiraled into civil war. But the Grimm-Finke picture is that much more often what happens is there's a secular regime, well, it could be a religious regime, but some kind of regime that's trying to coerce religious groups to act in particular ways, and it's out of self-defense that those groups fight back, but that the real cause of a lot of the conflict may be religious. Now, this is a very important factor to be aware of as a policy-making factor, and as I personally have worked on religious freedom issues in various countries around the world, one of the significant things is to help persuade policymakers that they can overreact. This is not to say that there aren't appropriate cases where state intervention is needed. It clearly is. That's what the limitation clauses of the international instruments are about. And those clauses were written by people who were not naive about the hazards of religious violence. But having said that, if you overreact and you are not able to convince religious groups that they will be fundamentally protected in their rights if they are willing to live peacefully, you can make things much worse by reacting. So, it seems to me that there are fundamental conditions that are required for peace. One of the great lessons of modernity is homogeneity is not required. We can have peace in pluralistic societies. The fundamental problems are fear of loss of position in society and a problem of threatened majorities. And the fundamental need is the assurance that one's own dignity and worldview will be protected and that one can live in peace. Obviously, if one can assure equal treatment, that's even better. But I can affirm for myself, I'm willing to live in a second-class status if I can live. I'm not recommending that, but it's part of why I put the priority on freedom over equality, as important as equality is. Now, part of this is also a reflection of the Lockean revolution. It really starts at the outset of modernity, that is really the basis for modernity, and Locke's recognition that what's really necessary for stability in society is providing respect for other people. Coerced toleration is a source of religious violence rather than a source of peace. Respecting difference breeds loyalty, stability, and peace. I think one of the things that we've come further in over the centuries since Locke is we recognize that there is a need for accommodation. Intrinsic justice and stability strengthening potential of religious freedom if law is construed to avoid conscientious conflict, except where there is a compelling need to override conscience that cannot be achieved in some less restrictive way. I'd recommend further restrictions to Locke. Accommodation is not really about making exceptions. That's typically the way liberal equalitarians paint the picture. But it's about deeper integration of constitutional and human rights principles that require respect for conscience. That is, when we make exceptions to ordinary laws to defer to conscience, we are not making an inequalitarian a breach of equality. What we're doing is recognizing that specific statutory norms fit in a deeper constitutional and human rights matrix, and that it is the statutes that don't recognize freedom of religion or belief that are making the exception to the more fundamental norms of society. We need to have a tightening of limitation clauses. I'm trying to look at the clock and go quickly, so I'll skip over this. But the point is that limitations are the limitation clauses in international instruments are very sophisticated. They operate to optimize the realm of religious freedom and the realm in which we respect people to make them feel safe in what is most important to them. And at the same time, recognizing that there are limits that need to be respected as well. Let me just, Brett Scharfs and I have written extensively on the contrast between secularism and secularity. I think this lines up with Recep Sentürk's notion of sort of the multiplex relationships. The issue here is secularism can be an ideology which is itself just another worldview trying to assert domination. And if that happens, other people will feel threatened by it. And one of the things that's happened in our current world is that religious believers are increasingly feeling threatened by sort of the secularist onslaught. On the other hand, if you have a mode of secular government which is committed to being open, it's the framework for everyone to be able to be protected in their views, where religion can be accepted in an open public sphere that's flexible, that protects substantive equality, that can work. That is the kind of framework we need to accommodate a complex society. Now, just by way of conclusion, I think freedom of religion or belief provides a number of peace-building mechanisms. It operates as a kind of filter that sorts out the optimal things that are good about religion, that are positive, the many positive contributions it makes to society, while recognizing that there is a dark side that has to be dealt with. Freedom of religion or belief is part of a stable background. I'm convinced that one of the reasons it's a non-derogable right in the international instruments is you need some assurance that religious freedom of religion or belief will be protected for people to work out of chaotic and unstable situations. It's helpful to proliferate the number of peacemakers in society. It gives greater diversity, a greater range of people that people can look to as leaders that can be trusted. It provides securing of the protection of religious communities themselves. Freedom of religion or belief is not just about protecting individuals, but protecting the rights of communities to exist in ways that they believe are important. It contributes to a cultivation of a range of socially productive virtues. I'm going to skip. And to opening channels of dialogue and negotiation. To providing peacekeeping personnel, that can be very significant. To promoting altruism. We know a lot about the role that religion plays in promoting altruism, volunteer conduct, humanitarian aid. 30% of global health care is provided by religious groups. In general, contributing to the material foundations of a stable society. So in conclusion, religious freedom has an important role to play in the structure of peace building. There is a complex interrelationship of religion and violence, and we need to avoid oversimplified assumptions. The freedom of religion or belief is a vital filtering mechanism which helps to optimize the positive role of religion while acknowledging some realities about limiting its dark side. There are profound positive ways that religion can contribute to conflict resolution and stability, and I hope this has contributed to sort of greater clarity of thought and policy thinking about the importance of protecting religion, and that will ultimately contribute to stability rather than to open up space for violence. Thank you.
Thank you to each of our panelists. It's been a rich and thoughtful, thought-provoking discussion. At this point, we only have a few minutes, but what I'd like to do is to take 2 or 3 questions and then give time to each of the panelists to be able to respond to those and give a few concluding comments as they go. Yes, please. Remember to speak into the mic and explain where you're from.
I'm Brian Lucas from Australia. My question is directed to Professor Durham. Your first slide from the European Court of Human Rights contained the word tolerate. And I'm wondering if that is the right word. Later on, your slide on Locke used the word respect. I wonder when we use the word tolerate, we're really saying, well, we're putting up with the other. Life would be better if the other wasn't there. We wish really the other wasn't there so things would be simple. If we change that word tolerate to respect, are we then affirming the existence of the other, and rather than simply tolerating, by being more proactive in our affirmation of the other, we're likely to contribute to greater stability? I'd be interested in a comment on that.
All right, let's take just a couple more. Thank you. Appreciate that. Here, please.
Thank you, Tim Wilson from Australia as well, and I'm sorry, my question is also to Col Durham. I was just wondering, in your slide about secularism versus secularity, you drew the distinction between what you thought were the two. I'm just trying to get clarity. Are you suggesting that secularism should be a policy for government, but secularity should be a policy of society? Or are you saying secularity should be the policy of government as well?
Thank you. Maybe one more question? Yes, please, over here.
Sí, al profesor Sentürk. Bueno, me ha gustado, yo soy Julio Méndez.
Professor Sentürk.
Sí, al profesor Sentürk, soy Julio Méndez de Argentina.
Yes, headsets.
Sí. Profesor Sentürk, le agradezco mucho su exposición.
I appreciate your presentation, and I understand that the complexity in your presentation might have left a lot of questions in the short amount of time we had, but I would like to mention the following. I understood that you said that within your proposed way to administer diversity, there's room for Judaism and there's room for Christianity, and that it is necessary to acknowledge their rights. My question is, whether
su propuesta son iguales los
in
derechos
your proposal, whether their rights are the same for Islam, for Judaism, for Christianity, or other religions,
derechos
or whether these are diverse rights.
We'll take a minute. Perhaps we'll start with Professor Sentürk and come on.
Okay. As I mentioned in my presentation, there are three types of rights. At one level, rights are universal. These are called daruriyat, which I translate to English as axiomatic rights. And they are also called in Arabic hukuk al-adamiyyin, rights of the Ademis, rights of the human beings. These are universal, and they are given to all human beings because they are human beings. And these include 6 fundamental rights: inviolability of life, religion, property, mind, which we usually call today freedom of expression, honor, and family. So these rights are universal and granted to everyone, regardless of religion, gender, color, or wealth. And when it comes to legal rights and moral rights, legal rights may be different from group to group. So women may have different rights than men, and children, elderly may have different rights, because legal rights, they are not universal. And moral rights are also, like there are universal moral rights and moral rights that are special for certain groups. The best example for the practice of this in Islamic law, as I mentioned in my presentation as well, is the way Buddhists and the Hindus were treated under Islamic rule in India. So many people are familiar with the fact that Islamic law grants rights to people of the book who are Christians and the Jews, but less people are familiar with the fact that Islamic law grants the same rights to everyone, regardless of the religion. So the case of India is a good example to demonstrate that Islamic law universally grants freedom of religion, right to life, property, family, honor to all human beings, regardless of their religion. Thank you.
So thank you to Brian and Tim for the questions to me. First, on the phraseology, toleration versus respect. I'm always someone who is for respect. I was working with the quotation in that particular passage, but I think there is something worth being sensitive to. David Little has written a very thoughtful article in defense of toleration, because, you know, on the one hand, I think there is an obligation to respect other human beings and their rights. That doesn't necessarily carry with it an obligation to respect their views, and toleration may be a better word in some of those contexts. But I think your fundamental point is that in terms of creating societies that are stable, peaceful, and avoid violence, showing genuine respect to other people, respecting their rights is very important. Then with respect to Tim Wilson's question about secularism versus secularity, about 5 years ago, Javier Martinez-Taron and I supervised a big project for the International Academy of Comparative Law, studying religion in the secular state. And we had reports from about 45 or 50 countries. And one of the things that was really striking to us is that countries could take a couple of approaches. One was they could try to press forward and implement a policy of secularism, secularization, sort of eliminate signs of religion in public space, sort of separation that was of religion and state that was separationist to the point of being hostile. And we saw, in contrast to that, states that were much more flexible, that understood creating a secular order in a much more secular way that we just invented a word for, secularity, to contrast with the idea of secularism as an ideology, an end in itself. So I think the answer to your question is we very much see secularity as something we would hope would be a preferred way of going forward for state policy, for the state, as well as for society, because what you need is a framework. If you have a framework that accommodates and is respectful of all the parties in society, they can then feel safe. They're not spending their time worried about shoring up their position against others. They can go forward and be productive in society, and they will feel respected in their human rights.
Thank you. I believe we're right at the end. Thank you. I believe we're right at the end of our time. I'm sure that there's much more that would be enjoyable and profitable to discuss, and we encourage you to continue the discussions during the break. But I'd like you to ask me to join with me in thanking our panelists one last time.